The sky above the colony of Elysium 9 was a bruised shade of purple, streaked with the faint glow of a dying sun. The air was thick with the scent of ionized particles, a reminder of the planet's unstable atmosphere. It was a harsh world, but it was home, or at least it had been for Kayla Voss and her daughter Lyra. Now it felt like a prison. Kayla stood at the edge of the settlement, her hands resting on the rusted railing of the observation deck. Below her, the colony sprawled out like a mechanical scar on the landscape. Modular housing units, connected by a labyrinth of walkways, hummed with the faint buzz of energy grids. Beyond the settlement, the barren plains stretched endlessly, dotted with jagged rock formations and the occasional skeletal remains of long-dead flora. Lyra tugged at her mother's sleeve, her wide, luminous eyes reflecting the dim light of the colony. "Mama, why don't they like us anymore?" Kayla's heart ached at the question. She knelt down, brushing a strand of silver hair from her daughter's face. Lyra's hair was the same shade as her father's, a stark contrast to Kayla's dark locks. It was one of the many things that marked them as different as other. "It's not that they don't like us, sweetheart," Kayla said, her voice soft but strained. "They're just scared." "Scared of what?" Lyra asked, her brow furrowing. Kayla hesitated. How could she explain to a child that they were seen as cursed, that the colony blamed them for the string of misfortunes that had befallen Elysium, 9 since her husband's death? It had started with the power grid failures, then the crop blight, and finally the mysterious illness that had claimed the lives of 3 settlers. The colonists had whispered at first, but soon the whispers turned to accusations. Kayla and Lyra were outcasts now, shunned by the very people they had once called neighbors. "Scared of things they don't understand," Kayla said finally. She forced a smile, though it felt brittle on her lips. "But we'll be okay. We have each other, right?" Lyra nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. Kayla straightened, taking her daughter's hand as they turned away from the observation deck. They walked in silence through the empty streets, the weight of the colony's disdain pressing down on them like a physical force. The Voss's housing unit was at the far edge of the settlement, isolated from the rest of the colony. It was a small, cramped space, but it was all they had. Kayla had done her best to make it feel like home, hanging Lyra's drawings on the walls and keeping a small potted plant by the window, a rare luxury on a planet where nothing grew easily. That night, as Lyra slept, Kayla sat at the small table in the corner, staring at the holographic image of her husband, Yarrick. His face was kind, his eyes filled with the quiet strength that had drawn her to him all those years ago. He had been a scientist, one of the first to volunteer for the Elysium 9 mission. He had believed in the colony's potential, in the promise of a new beginning. But that promise had died with him. Kayla's fingers traced the edge of the hologram, her thoughts swirling. She had tried to stay strong for Lyra, but the loneliness was eating away at her. She missed Jarek's steady presence, his unwavering belief that things would get better. Without him, she felt adrift, like a ship lost in the void. A soft chime broke the silence, pulling Kayla from her thoughts. She frowned, glancing at the door. No one ever visited them anymore. The chime sounded again, more insistent this time. Kayla rose to her feet, her heart pounding as she approached the door. The screen beside the door flickered to life, displaying the face of a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. His uniform marked him as a member of the Interstellar Relief Corps, but Kayla had never seen him before. "Kayla Voss?" the man asked, his voice calm but authoritative. "Yes," Kayla replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Captain Elias Drake. I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Kayla hesitated, her hand hovering over the door controls. She glanced back at Lyra, still asleep on the cot in the corner. Whatever this was about, she couldn't risk waking her. She opened the door just enough to peer out at the man. "What do you want?" Drake's expression softened slightly. "I know you've been through a lot, and I don't mean to intrude, but I believe I can help you and your daughter." Kayla's eyes narrowed. "Help us how?" Drake glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure they were alone. "There's a ship waiting at the landing pad. It can take you away from here, to a place where you'll be safe. But we need to leave now." Kayla's mind raced. This had to be a trick, some kind of cruel joke. No one had offered to help them in months. "Why should I trust you?" Drake reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, silver pendant. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. It was Jarek's pendant, the one he had always worn. She hadn't seen it since the day he died. "Jarek was a friend," Drake said quietly. "He asked me to look after you if anything ever happened to him. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." Tears welled in Kayla's eyes as she took the pendant, her fingers trembling. She wanted to believe him, to believe that there was still hope. But the fear of being betrayed again held her back. Drake seemed to sense her hesitation. "I know you're scared, but if you stay here, things will only get worse. Please, Kayla, let me help you." Kayla looked back at Lyra, her heart aching. She couldn't keep living like this, hiding from the world, watching her daughter grow up in fear and isolation. If there was even a chance that Drake was telling the truth, she had to take. "Give me a moment," she said, her voice barely audible. She hurried to the cot, gently shaking Lyra awake. "Sweetheart, we need to go." Lyra blinked up at her, confused. "Go where?" "Somewhere safe," Kayla said, forcing a smile. "Somewhere better." Lyra sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Will there be other kids?" Kayla's heart clenched. "I hope so." She helped Lyra into her coat, then grabbed the small bag of belongings they had managed to hold on to. When they returned to the door, Drake was still waiting, his expression patient. "Ready?" he asked. Kayla nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. She took Lyra's hand, stepping out into the cold night air. The colony was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the energy grid. Drake led them through the narrow streets, his movements quick and purposeful. Kayla kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see a mob of colonists chasing after them. But the streets remained empty. When they reached the landing pad, Kayla's breath caught in her throat. A sleek, silver ship waited there, its engines humming softly. It was unlike any ship she had ever seen, its design both elegant and imposing. Drake ushered them aboard, the hatch sealing behind them with a soft hiss. The interior of the ship was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment of the colony. "Welcome to the Starweaver," Drake said, his voice tinged with pride. "She's one of the fastest ships in the fleet." Kayla sank into one of the seats, her legs trembling. Lyra climbed into her lap, her eyes wide with wonder as she looked around the cabin. "Where are we going?" Kayla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Drake took a seat across from her, his expression serious. "There's a colony on the other side of the galaxy. It's called Nova Prime. It's a place where people like you and Lyra can start over without fear or prejudice." Kayla's heart swelled with hope, though it was tempered by the lingering fear of the unknown. "Why us? Why now?" Drake hesitated, his gaze flickering to Lyra. "Because you're not the only ones who've been cast out. There are others like you, people who don't fit into the rigid structures of society. Nova Prime is a sanctuary for them. For us." Kayla's eyes widened. "Like us?" Drake nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I was cast out from my own colony years ago. I know what it's like to feel alone, to feel like no one wants you. But I also know that there's a place where we belong, and I want to help you find it." Tears streamed down Kayla's cheeks as the weight of his words sank in. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. She looked down at Lyra, who was already dozing off in her arms. "Thank you," Kayla whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Drake nodded, his expression softening. "We'll be at Nova Prime in a few days. Until then, try to rest. You're safe now." As the ship lifted off, Kayla leaned back in her seat, her arms wrapped tightly around Lyra. The colony of Elysium 9 grew smaller and smaller in the viewport until it was nothing more than a speck in the vast expanse of space. For the first time in a long time, Kayla allowed herself to believe that things could get better, that they could find a place where they belonged, a place where no one would call them cursed. As the Starweaver soared through the stars, Kayla closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. They were finally free. Nova Prime was everything Drake had promised, and more. The colony was a vibrant, thriving community, filled with people from all walks of life. There were scientists, artists, engineers, and dreamers, all united by their shared experiences of being cast out, of being different. Kayla and Lyra quickly found their place among them. Kayla joined the colony's research team, using her knowledge of botany to help cultivate the planet's harsh soil. Lyra, meanwhile, made friends with the other children, her laughter echoing through the streets as she played. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time in years, Kayla felt like she was home, like she and Lyra were exactly where they were meant to be. As she stood on the observation deck of Nova Prime, watching the twin suns set over the horizon, Kayla felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She thought of Yarrick, of the life they had lost, and whispered a silent thank you to the stars. They had been cast out, abandoned, and left to fend for themselves. But in the end, they had found a place where they belonged, a place where they were wanted, and that was enough.